The first thing Marissa noticed when she stepped through the rusty gate was that her childhood home looked smaller than she remembered. The blue paint had almost completely disappeared, the old windows were cracked, and weeds had grown along the narrow path where she had once run barefoot as a little girl. But none of that frightened her. What froze her heart was the silence. Her parents had always filled this house with noise, the sound of her mother humming while cooking, the scraping of her father's chair across the floor, and his familiar cough from the little room at the back of the house. Now, at 31, after 18 years away, Marissa had returned as a wealthy woman with everything she had once dreamed of buying for them. Yet as she stood in the bright afternoon sunlight, holding expensive gifts in a suitcase filled with money, she had no idea that her father's room contained something that would completely change what she believed about her past. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness, forgiveness, and second chances can change a person's life, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this to you. Marissa had been 13 years old when she left that house. At that age, she had believed her father hated her. Her father, Corbin, had been a quiet carpenter who worked from sunrise until evening repairing furniture, doors, and old wooden cabinets for people in their neighborhood. Her mother, Alara, worked from home sewing clothes for families nearby. They never had much money, but Marissa remembered feeling loved until the day everything changed. Her dream had always been to study architecture. She would sit beside her father in his workshop and draw houses on scraps of paper while he worked. Corbin would look at her drawings with tired eyes and tell her that one day she would design buildings that reached the sky. But dreams became difficult when Corbin lost most of his customers after a large furniture factory opened in the town. His small workshop began to fail. Bills piled up. Electricity was cut off twice. There were days when the family ate only rice and vegetables. Still, Corbin never complained in front of Marissa. He simply worked longer hours, coming home with sawdust on his clothes and exhaustion written across his face. Then one afternoon, everything shattered. A scholarship opportunity came for Marissa to attend a prestigious school in another city. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. But there was a problem. The school required money for travel, clothing, books, and several other expenses that her parents simply could not afford. Marissa saw the disappointment in her father's face and assumed he was going to tell her to forget the dream. Instead, Corbin became strangely distant. He stopped talking about her drawings. He stopped asking about school. He even seemed irritated whenever she mentioned the scholarship. One rainy evening, Marissa overheard him telling Alara that they could not afford to keep sacrificing everything for their daughter. She misunderstood every word. The next morning, she found an envelope on the kitchen table containing a bus ticket and a short note telling her to leave and build a better life somewhere else. Marissa was heartbroken. She believed her father had abandoned her. She left that morning with a small bag, tears running down her cheeks as she looked back at the house. Her mother cried and hugged her tightly, but Corbin never came outside. Marissa waited for him to appear at the doorway. He never did. For the next 18 years, she carried that pain with her. Life in the city was brutally difficult at first. She slept in a tiny rented room, worked part-time jobs, studied late into the night, and often survived on cheap bread and tea. There were moments when she wanted to return home, but every time she remembered her father's cold silence, pride stopped her. Slowly, however, things changed. Marissa became an excellent student. Her architectural designs began winning competitions. A small company hired her after graduation, and within a few years, she started her own design firm. Her creativity, discipline, and determination turned her company into one of the fastest-growing architectural businesses in the region. Money followed success. By the time she was 31, Marissa had become wealthy enough to own a beautiful house, several properties, and a successful company with dozens of employees. But there was one thing wealth could never buy: her childhood. For 18 years, she had wondered why her father had pushed her away. Then, one quiet afternoon, she finally decided to return. She bought medicine for her mother, expensive clothing for her father, groceries, new furniture, and enough money to repair their old house. She imagined her parents opening the gate and seeing their daughter standing there, successful and independent. She imagined her father crying. She imagined him apologizing. She imagined finally hearing the words she had wanted since she was 13. But when she reached the house, no one came running. The front door was unlocked. "Mom," Marissa called softly. A weak voice answered from inside. Her mother appeared from the hallway. Alara looked older than Marissa remembered. Her hair had turned silver, her shoulders were bent, and she leaned heavily against the wall for support. For a few seconds, mother and daughter simply stared at each other. Then Alara recognized her. Her hands began to tremble. Marissa dropped the bags and rushed into her mother's arms. They cried in the middle of the small living room, holding each other as 18 years of silence collapsed between them. But one question immediately came to Marissa's mind. Where is Dad? Her mother's expression changed. She looked toward the hallway. He's in his room. Marissa smiled through her tears and walked toward the back of the house. She expected to find her father sitting in his old wooden chair. Instead, she found the room almost empty. The curtains were open, allowing clear afternoon sunlight to fall across the floor. His old tools were arranged neatly against the wall. A simple bed stood beside the window. But Corbin wasn't there. Marissa turned around. Where is he? Her mother slowly lowered herself into the chair. He passed away 3 months ago. The world seemed to stop. Marissa stared at her mother, unable to breathe. 3 months. She had arrived 3 months too late. She had spent 18 years believing her father didn't want her, while he had spent his final months waiting for a daughter who never came. Marissa collapsed onto the floor. For the first time in 18 years, she cried like the 13-year-old girl who had walked away from that house. Her mother placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. He asked about you every day. Marissa looked up in disbelief. What? Alara wiped her tears. Your father never hated you. He was afraid. Afraid of what? Her mother pointed toward the small wooden cabinet beside Corbin's bed. He left something for you. Marissa slowly opened it. Inside was an old notebook covered in dust. Her hands shook as she picked it up. On the first page, written in her father's handwriting, were 4 words. For my little architect. Marissa stopped breathing. She turned the page. The notebook contained hundreds of entries. Some were only a few sentences. Others filled entire pages. The first entry was dated the week she left home. He had written about selling his workshop. He had written about borrowing money. He had written about taking extra night jobs. Then Marissa discovered the truth. Corbin had not pushed her away because he didn't love her. He had pushed her away because he wanted her to accept the scholarship. He knew they could not afford her education, so he secretly sold his workshop, his tools, and almost everything valuable he owned to pay for her first year. The cold words she had overheard that night had been misunderstood. He had actually been telling Alara that he couldn't bear to let poverty destroy their daughter's future. Marissa turned another page. There were receipts, school payments, bus tickets, books, even small amounts of money he had secretly sent her during her first years in the city. She remembered those anonymous envelopes. She had always assumed they were scholarship assistance. They were from her father. Then she found something even more painful. A photograph. It showed 13-year-old Marissa standing beside her father in his workshop, holding one of her first house drawings. Behind the photograph was a message. I told her to leave because I wanted her to fly. I only pray she never believes I pushed her away because I stopped loving her. Marissa pressed the photograph against her chest. Her tears fell onto the page. But the notebook wasn't finished. The final pages had been written only weeks before Corbin died. His handwriting was weaker and uneven. He wrote about watching the road every afternoon. He wrote about wondering whether Marissa had become an architect. He wrote about being proud of her even though he had never seen her success. And then came the sentence that destroyed her completely. If she ever comes home, please don't tell her I waited. Let her believe I was strong. A father should not make his child carry his regrets. Marissa closed the notebook and cried. Her mother sat beside her. He knew you would come one day, Alara whispered. He always believed you would. Marissa looked around the room. For 18 years, she had thought this room represented rejection. Now she realized it represented love. Every tool on the wall had a story. Every scratch on the wooden table represented a sacrifice. Every page of that notebook represented a father who had loved his daughter so deeply that he was willing to let her hate him if it meant she could have a better future. That evening, Marissa made a promise. She would not allow his sacrifices to disappear. She used her wealth to restore the old house exactly as it had been, keeping her father's workshop untouched. Then she established a scholarship foundation in his name for children from poor families who dreamed of becoming architects, engineers, teachers, doctors, or artists. But she kept one thing for herself. Her father's notebook. Years later, whenever Marissa walked into her company's headquarters, she would pass a framed photograph of Corbin hanging beside the entrance. Underneath it were simple words. He gave me a future before he could afford one for himself. And every year, on the anniversary of his death, Marissa returned to the old house with her mother. She would sit in her father's room during the quiet afternoon and open the notebook. She never stopped missing him. But she finally stopped blaming him. Sometimes love does not arrive in the way we expect. Sometimes the people who love us most make sacrifices we cannot understand until years later. And sometimes, by the time we discover the truth, the person we desperately wanted to thank is no longer there to hear it. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone you love, and leave a comment. You never know how much a simple message of kindness might mean to someone who is silently carrying an old misunderstanding. And before you leave, special request. Comment, love never leaves, if you believe that a parent's sacrifice can continue changing a child's life even after they are gone. Because Marissa learned something that wealth could never teach her. Sometimes the greatest inheritance a parent leaves behind is not money, property, or possessions. It is the proof that, even when life looked like rejection, someone was quietly loving you all along.